with a few different questions. Is Nigel Farage the new working class hero of this country? And the BBC are going after cash-strapped Brits using bailiffs to get the licence fee. Is it time to get rid of this hated TV tax? But first, Nigel Farage urges voters on the right to unite behind reform to stop Andy Burnham, as the Makerfield by-election polls showed that it's a two-horse race. But it could be that Restore, of course led by Rupert Lowe, may thwart Reform's efforts to win that seat. Let's get reaction from Sir Michael Fabricant, former Conservative MP and now broadcaster and political commentator. Good morning, Sir Michael.
Good morning, Mark. And can I say, for those people watching on YouTube, how great you look, because normally, I must tell people that Mark is normally wearing a three-piece suit, a tie and a very formal shirt, and he looks absolutely great with a crimson open-neck shirt and a lovely white jacket.
Well, thank you for that appraisal. That's high praise coming from yourself, given what a clothes horse you are, Michael. If you want to see the ridiculous outfits we're all wearing, head to YouTube, search Talking Up We Pop. So, Michael, so many stories to get through, including dodgy EU loos that don't work. But can I ask you about your appraisal of the political right at the moment? Are they going to essentially help the left in Bakerfield and potentially at the next election by fighting with each other?
Absolutely, yes. And, you know, there's practical examples of this. I mean, my own old constituency of Lichfield, the right absolutely outvoted Labour. But because Reform and the Conservatives were split, I got about 16,000 votes, but Reform got 10,000 votes. It let a Labour MP in, which was the last thing that either Reform or Conservative voters wanted. And frankly, that was how the Labour government that we currently have got elected. It was the split votes between the Conservatives and Reform. And now we see the same thing happening again in Makerfield, because you've got Restore breaking in and maybe getting 7% of the vote. That's the current estimate made by the pollsters. And you know what? That will mean that Andy Burnham will slip in through the middle. And I don't think that's what either Restore, Reform or Conservative voters want in Makerfield.
Most definitely. Rafe, what do you make of this political psychodrama playing out between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, who at one point were political allies?
I think it's deeply unfortunate, and I can only think of how strong Reform would be in the polls if Rupert was still in the party and we hadn't had those unfortunate scenes. But, you know, Sir Michael is absolutely correct. Look, Andy Burnham is the only leadership candidate that the polls say has a chance of beating Keir Starmer. If Keir Starmer goes head-to-head with Miliband, with Rayner, with Streeting, he's forecast to beat all of them. So if you vote for... if you split the vote and you allow Andy Burnham in, he's almost certain to become Prime Minister of this country. And that's what matters, because if you look at the broader national polling, Andy Burnham on the last poll has a chance of beating the Reform. The Labour Party certainly will come into top place if he becomes Prime Minister. The question then is, does Andy Burnham use that honeymoon period, use that bounce to call a sudden snap general election and use his honeymoon to get some sort of majority government, which means another 5 years, potentially of an even worse, even more woke and progressive government? That's a disaster for everybody. So yes, obviously at this stage, I don't think anyone's going to stand their candidates down in the Makerfield by-election, but I want all voters who are scared about Burnham and Labour getting another election to think about voting tactically. Put aside your grievances about disputes between parties for this one by-election. And if you're in Makerfield, just vote tactically for the person that you think is most likely to be able to defeat Burnham, and that obviously seems to be the Reform candidate in this case.
Most definitely. And chaps, I've been crunching the numbers. Sir Michael and Rafe, if you look at the outcome of the last general election and the popular vote, the Conservatives achieved just shy of 7 million votes. Reform UK, just over 4 million. If you combine that, it comes to almost 11 million people having voted for a right-wing party. 11 million. Well, 9.5 million people voted Labour. So we really ought to have a right-leaning Conservative administration. The problem we have, Michael, is divided parties on the left and the right are going to absolutely and drastically impact the outcome. It's mathematics, isn't it?
It is. And you know, the Makerfield by-election is turning not so much into a by-election, but a grudge match. You've got Starmer versus Burnham. Sue Gray has now joined the field, a supporter of Burnham. You remember she was the chief of staff to Starmer in number 10, and then she was sacked by Starmer, and now she's getting her own back by backing Burnham. And you've got the private unfortunate squabble between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. And Rupert Lowe, it's a grudge match again. And you could argue it's very, very selfish because the losers are not going to be those individuals. The losers will be the United Kingdom as a consequence. And let's not make any mistake. Andy Burnham, you know, is a lovely, great guy to meet, and I've met him lots of times. But, you know, there are so many things that went badly wrong during his administration of the Manchester area when he was, in fact, he still is the mayor of Manchester. And being PM, I think he will be far, far left of Starmer. So if you think things are bad now, they're going to get far worse.
Most definitely. Sir Michael, tell me about dodgy EU toilets that don't work.
Well, this was a great campaign of mine because in Lichfield, there is a town called Armitage, which is not far away, and some great there's a plum pudding pub. There's some great pubs, very, very nice in Armitage, including I'm trying to remember the name of it. Anyway, that's not important. What is important is that in Armitage is one big factory called Armitage Shanks, or was called Armitage Shanks. It's now owned by an American group, Ideal Standard, or American Standard as it's known in the US. Anyway, the point is this, that in 1997, when Tony Blair got in, full of enthusiasm for the European Union, the European Union was saying that the British siphonic toilets, get that word out, siphonic, and not what some Labour minister called symphonic when I actually introduced it as a debate. The siphonic toilet is slightly more expensive than the valve toilet that they have in Europe. But in France, they reckoned at the time, back in 1997, that 400 million gallons every year, just in France alone, are wasted by water trickling out of the toilet and literally going down the pan. And the point with the siphonic system is you need a vacuum, I'm getting very technical here, to actually make the toilet work, which means it won't leak. It's brilliant. But what did Tony Blair do? He allowed these European toilets in. But now we hear that the Labour government are thinking of doing a U-turn about the U-bend, because they're now thinking, you know what? The Brits got it right all along, right from the very beginning. So we could be seeing a Brexit dividend, which will mean that we'll have the siphonic, non-leaking toilets back again. And incidentally, the siphonic toilet system, which is so good, was invented by no less than Thomas Crapper. And I'll let you work out for yourself how he became a very famous person indeed, both in the UK and the US, and especially in Australia.
Most definitely. Thank you for that history lesson. But I think it's important because we've had these leaky loos. They're as the result of, obviously, a policy of allowing these. Were they pitched as being more eco-friendly? What was the argument for these European lavatories, Sir Michael?
The only argument, and it was just one argument, was that it was stopping Italian and French manufacturers from selling into the UK. The European Union said that it was a barrier to trade and that we deliberately had the siphonic system to stop these European trashy toilets coming to the UK.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that. It was because the British toilet system, the siphonic system, actually works. And when they have toilet systems in America, because often it's a different type of valve, you know, where you sort of put down a plunger type thing, which operates a high pressure thing, which is a different system altogether. But when they have regular toilet systems in the US, they use our system because they know it's better too.
Most definitely. And a lot of this pertains to those toilets with two buttons for flushing. Is that right?
That's right. Well, that was an argument.
Which I've always hated those. Just give me one good flush, please.
Yeah, the argument was it uses slightly less water if you whittle in the toilet and you don't want to have a full flush. But actually, the amount of water it saves is far, far less than the 400 million gallons every year wasted by the leaky valve, which inevitably happens with these toilets that you get. I've had literally a brand new toilet fitted in where I am now, in the middle of Wales, where it's glorious and sunny, by the way. And it's been leaking actually from about a month old. And that's what they do. It's an inferior system. But Labour, of course, made light of it at the time. And sadly, the consequence was these cheaper toilets came in. Not only did we have leakage, but more sadly, Armitage Shanks got taken over by Ideal Standard, the US firm, because they started losing money on this. And that's a great shame.
Well, Rafe, yielding to the will of the EU has been very costly for this country over many years, hasn't it? For example, do you remember the carbon targets under the premiership of Tony Blair with Gordon Brown in number 11, in which we were all encouraged to purchase diesel rather than petrol-engined cars because they produced lower CO2 emissions? That was an EU directive. Well, it was a terrible policy because the emissions from diesel engines are far worse for human health. So what we've done is essentially sacrificed our health at the altar of an EU directive on carbon.
Yes, but can I just say, one of the reasons I love talk is that we have, this is the only place where you get a knight of the realm giving a passionate and patriotic defence of British lavatories and detailed information about the leaky valves of foreign loos. I think it's absolutely glorious. And yes, he's quite right on all the points he makes, as are you. Remember how many people invested in these diesel in these diesel engines and diesel cars, and of course all the damage that caused not only to themselves but also to their pocketbooks. People forget about as well. And then you had the scandal, didn't you? Was it of Volkswagen, I believe it was,
yep,
who was basically faking their emission standards?
Well, we poisoned the lungs of our kids in the name of carbon emissions as a result of an EU directive. It's very clear that the emissions from a petrol engine are far safer for human health than diesel engines. And I believe it was in 2000 we had around 1 million diesel cars. By 2010, it was 10 million. So we by an order of magnitude, we purchased diesel cars. And have we saved the planet with that?
No, well, you could argue have anything that we've done in this country actually save the planet, given that we only account for 1% of emissions, and we're essentially hog-tying ourselves, tying our hands behind our back while other countries leap forward in leaps and bounds ahead of us. I would say, look at Poland. Poland's grown its economy by 18%. We've since 2019, we've only grown our economy by 1%. But yep, you're absolutely right. And the key thing here for me is that no heads rolled over this diesel issue. Time and again, we see these sorts of devastating decisions being made. This, as you say, has affected the lives, the health of people in this country, and yet nobody has been held to account for it.
Most definitely. Sir Michael, we know you're on a busy schedule. Might you be available to stay with us for after the break until 11?
I can, yes, indeed.
I voted for reform when they were grassroots, says Red. I left when Farage came back as I don't trust him and don't want a Muslim PM in Zia Yusuf. This from Matthew in Cheltenham. Good morning, Mark. I was in Canada for 25 years and have joint citizenship. Your guest, Rafe, is only half right. Canada is shockingly left-wing, thanks to the Trudeau family. But Rafe is right about talent because they work on a points system. But the problem is that once they're in, they use the system to get all of the relatives in the back door. They do not integrate. There are areas throughout the Gooden Horseshoe, Toronto area, which are West Indian, East Indian, Chinese, because they won't integrate. In fact, they openly want other races out of their areas. Well, that's what happens, isn't it, Rafe?
Yeah, I should say, I used to live in Canada, so what I was talking about specifically, I said Canada was seen as very left-wing in the 80s and 90s, when this wasn't the case. In the 80s and 90s, they were cherry-picking the best and the brightest. I wasn't referring to what's happened recently in the last decade or so under Trudeau, when, yes, suddenly Canada has become just as crazy, if not crazier, than Britain. But in the period of the 80s and 90s, when everyone celebrated Canadian immigration, they were choosing a very, very different type of immigrant to what they've encouraged today. And yes, the rate of change in Canada has been remarkable, and not in a good way.
Not in a good way is absolutely right. So, Michael, Nigel Farage has announced that if he becomes Prime Minister, one of his first policies will be to scrap income tax on overtime. Is this a good move? You're not just ex-politician of significant stature, you're an entrepreneur as well. Do you think this policy will work? Now, we're just getting the line to Sir Michael at the moment. He's been thwarted. He's been censored, actually, because he's dropping too many truth bombs. Sir Michael, Nigel Farage to scrap income tax on overtime hours. Your reaction?
Right. I don't know what bit you caught. I think it's a good idea in principle. It will cost about £5 billion. But, you know, we have a real problem in this country with both tax and benefits, which actually both of them work together to conspire to be a disincentive to work. And this is the issue in this country. It's often better just not to work than to work. And this is the idea behind Nigel Farage's good idea. But in practice, the question is, well, it's going to cost around £5 billion, which the Exchequer won't get if we put this in place. Of course, ultimately, it'll be collected because people, we think and hope, and that's the whole aim of it, will work harder. And when you work harder, you do pay more tax, and that's fair. But in the short term, nothing will happen. In the short term, there'll be a lag. So where is he going to fill that £5 billion from? But as far as I'm concerned, anything that encourages people to work and get off their big fat bottoms has to be a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Rafe, I like the messaging of this policy because it encourages people to work hard rather than punishing them to do so. I'm a little worried about execution. I'm worried about companies having workarounds, and I'm worried about corruption.
Yeah, no, well, I think you're right on all 3 points there, and that's obviously the first point is why Nigel and Reform have done this. It's going to play very well with his voters. People must be seen that work actually pays. Of course, we now know, obviously, being in benefits pays often more than being in work pays. So if you can actually do overtime and retain all of that income, I think that's going to be only for the better for Britain, particularly, of course, when we have a productivity crisis in this country. We need to do all that we can to get as many shoulders behind the wheel of British industry and British work in every way. But yes, you're always going to have rascals and rogue employers who are going to try to do what they can to circumnavigate all these sorts of things. And you are going to, of course, have endemic corruption, as we see so much is happening. And, of course, if you're in the underground economy, which so many people are, where most of this corruption happens, there's no distinction at all going to be made.
So, Michael, Fabricant, long-term unemployment hits a decade high. And, of course, we have the highest youth unemployment in the whole of Europe. Labour isn't working.
No, but should we be surprised? Not only did we have the 2% rise on national insurance, we also had business rates going back up again, which is destroying the nighttime economy where many young people do work, or they would work if the businesses were still in business. This is all predictable. So why has it happened? And it's happened because hardly anyone on the Labour Party parliamentary side, whether they be frontbenchers or backbenchers, have run anything in their life. Before I became a Member of Parliament, I ran a business which set up radio and TV stations, originally in the UK, and then we did it in 48 different countries around the world who were clients of ours. And one thing I was very aware of was cash flow as well as profitability. And I don't think my company could have actually survived under the present condition, because it goes out of its way to encourage people not to work and to drive businesses out of business. And it's all predictable, and it was predictable from day one when Labour first got into office, and you had Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer talking down the economy and saying, oh, there's going to be a crisis, oh, we're going to have to bring in a budget which will be really punitive. And because they did that, businesses stopped investing. It was predictable, but not to this Labour lot. The incompetence is utterly staggering.
It is, and it's very sad to see what businesses are going through, because I take the view, Rafe and Sir Michael, that businesses are very virtuous organisations because they employ people so the state doesn't have to, and they create products that we purchase and consume. And of course, they generate national income. So if I was Prime Minister, we can but dream, I would love bomb the businesses. And I think there is a left-wing progressive case for low taxes and a business-friendly environment. I think to a degree New Labour got it, but this current Labour administration do not. It is a race to the bottom. Let's take a voice note from Kevin.
These people that say they don't want Nigel Farage in because he'll destroy the country. Well, isn't that what this government's doing now, destroying the country? It's put thousands of people out of work, thousands more to come. We've got loads of migrants here who aren't working, getting benefits, and they want more of them come to do the skilled jobs that nobody will do. Really?
Most definitely. And I do think, Sir Michael, that the establishment media outlets are deafening in their silence in regard to this failing government. We know that when Liz Truss had her economic challenges after the mini-budget, there was hell to pay. We've had 4 years of the evil Tories, but somehow I feel that the media are letting Labour off the hook.
Well, yes, I mean, people talk about the Liz Truss brief administration, and Keir Starmer likes to say it was an absolute catastrophe. But by all statistical measures, it's more of a catastrophe now, because under Liz Truss, we still had unemployment going down, we still had growth going up, and although borrowing rates were high, you know what? Now we've got unemployment going up, growth has gone right down to under 1%, and we're borrowing far higher than at higher rates of interest than we ever did under Liz Truss. So why aren't the media saying Rachel Reeves is the catastrophe? In fact, compared to Rachel Reeves, Liz Truss was a success.
Because most high-profile journalists and TV radio outlets are sympathetic to the Labour cause, are they not, Sir Michael?
Well, I think this is the point that our friend across the pond, Donald Trump, feels very much. For some reason or other, you know, you work in the media. I used to be a BBC radio journalist a long time ago, and I was in a minority, as you are, Mark. Most people in the BBC newsroom and other big newsrooms, and I'm going to include ITN, or the ITV network, tend to be left of centre. And I think it's partly because London is so atypical of the rest of the country. You still have stronghold areas in London which support Labour, which is certainly not the case in most parts of the country.
Absolutely. Sir Michael, enjoy the sunshine. Loved our conversation. Rafe is staying with us.